Hey everybody, it's Eugene Lisho, and welcome to episode 40 of Forensics Talks. And every time I make another 10, I'm always getting excited. I can't believe I've gotten this far. First off, I want to welcome everybody here. Remember that this is YouTube, so if you want to ask questions or you want to place comments, you can do so just on YouTube, and then we'll see them through here. So if you want, please go ahead and let us know where you're from. Always like to know where people are around the world. So go ahead and type those in, and I'll have a look after and for my viewing pleasure. Just a couple of quick announcements before we begin here. The first one is that there is the IABPA conference. So that's coming up September 27th to October 1st. That's the International Association of Bloodstain Pattern Analysts, and that's going to be held in Greeley, Colorado. It is in person and virtual. And I'm actually going to be running a workshop there. My workshop is going to be Thursday, September 30th from 10 a.m. Eastern. Okay, so it's 8 a.m. Denver time where it's being held in that particular region. Going to be presenting a new software, bloodstain pattern analysis software called BPA Investigator. First time I'm actually mentioning it is on here. So hoping that if you are attending, I know some of you that watch here will be there. So if you're interested, make sure you sign up. And you can just find more at iabpa.org. Okay, so just head over there. All right, let me clear that off, and we're going to get going here. So as many of you have seen, my guest today is Tom O'Connor, and Tom was a police officer in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where he worked for 15 years as a municipal officer, leaving for the FBI at the rank of detective sergeant. As a police officer, Tom worked and specialized in narcotics and violent gang investigations. Tom entered on duty with the FBI in 1997, and Special Agent O'Connor was assigned to work in the Washington field office on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And during this time, he worked both international and domestic terrorism cases. He is a 23-year career veteran with the FBI, now retired, but he coordinated investigations related to violent criminal actions by domestic extremists, and that's going to be our topic for today. Tom specialized in white supremacist threats and violence, and was the case agent for numerous incidents, including the shootings at the U.S. Pentagon security entrance and the Family Research Council in Washington, D.C., which was in 2012. Tom became a subject matter expert related to domestic extremism threats, and he's traveled extensively, training law enforcement and civic groups on these emerging threats. You'll also find him a lot online on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and he's definitely getting out there and sort of spreading the word. He's currently the principal consultant at FedSquared Consulting, LLC, and I'm going to bring him in here right now. Tom, thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks a lot, Eugene. This is it's pretty cool for me to be on a live type of event. So my dog starts barking. It's not nothing you can do about that.
Yeah. You know, I have to warn people. You know, what happens here stays here because it goes right away. So
I just hope that somebody doesn't come knock on the door because my dog will go nuts.
No problem. It's happened before. Don't worry about it. Well, I want to start off sort of with your background and how you got started. So obviously, you worked in policing. And was policing something that you or your family were, have a history of or something? Was it something that interested you? How did you get involved with that?
It really, I mean, it's something that was in my head as a very small child. And I at my parents' house where I grew up, actually in the closet of my bedroom, I had written in crayon, "My name is Tom O'Connor. I'm in the 6th grade and I want to be a police officer." And that was always there. And it was something I always wanted to do. And just recently I was going through a box of old stuff that, I had, were getting rid of and from my parents' house. And I found a document in the back of it was in the back of a French notebook that I was taking for elementary school. And it said, "My name is Tom O'Connor." I guess I must have been writing my future, right? And it said, "My name is Tom O'Connor. I hope to follow my dreams and be an FBI agent." And I did not remember in that part of my life ever. There was Efren Zimbalist Jr., who's over my shoulder here, that may have influenced me at that point. But it's been a dream of mine to be in law enforcement. And I actually started as a cadet in junior high school, and then went to local police departments and worked there for 15 years and loved every minute of local policing, because you're really part of the community, and you go out and you help people, and that person is somebody's parents that you went to high school with, or the connection is real. So local policing was my first love, and then I ended up working a really cool motorcycle gang case with the Massachusetts State Police and the FBI. And when I saw what kind of really cool stuff the FBI could bring to the table, I thought, man, maybe but I didn't know how to apply to the FBI. And literally in '96, there was a hiring freeze. And during that case, the hiring freeze broke. And the agents there said, hey, why don't you put in for an agent's position? And I did. And my wife followed me. She was a banker. And during my spousal interview, like where they come in and they sit down with your spouse and say, he's going to have to carry a gun and all this stuff. It's like, okay, he's been doing that for 15 years. He's going to work a lot of hours. She's like, there's no way he's going to work as many hours as he is now. So they asked her what she did. And she said, I'm a bank audit vice president. And they said, here, Tom, here's a video cassette of how to do push-ups. We're going to take Jean back here and talk to her. They recruited her, and she put an application in that day and came into the FBI 1 year later.
Holy mackerel! That's a cool story.
Yeah.
That's a really cool story.
So that's why we're here. And interesting, she retired, or she graduated from the FBI Academy on 9/11 of 1998. And then we both worked the events at 9/11 at the U.S. Pentagon. And to honor our friends and colleagues that we've lost from 9/11 illnesses where the FBI is up to 18 agents, and many of them very close friends of ours, many of them from the Pentagon. And so we decided to retire on September 11th of 2019 to do something they couldn't do, which is retire, and we did it to honor them. And so it's just 2 years we've been retired, and I can't say enough about having a great career and then getting out when it's your time to go.
Yeah. Well, I will say, this was on my mind actually beforehand, but I will say this right now, and that is, and I might have even probably saved it for later, but I think it's a good time to say it now, and that you strike me as a person that even though you've retired, you're sort of actively engaged in this thing, and you strike me as a person that's still very passionate about the work that you've done and the work that you're still doing. So I think that's a testament to you, and I think that's partly why you're here today. Online and the videos and all the interviews and things you're doing, I think really shows very well about who you are as a person and what you care about.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, the job in law enforcement, is many of the people that are watching your channel, or people that are students that are aspiring to get into law enforcement, it's not a job, it's a calling. And you don't go to crime scene after crime scene and do this stuff for the money. You do it because it means something, and you can really make an impact in people's lives. Those people may have passed as victims, but they've got families, and they need to know the truth. And really, the only truth that's out there is the forensic side of things that really helps the investigators. So, my career has been in the forensic side of things with our evidence response team, and then the casework. They work together, and that's something that my wife and I are both do a lot of talking about, is the crime scene intelligence, and how that the old days when I was a detective, we'd get the evidence put into the paper bags or the plastic bags that go down into the the bowels of the police department in the evidence room, and no one would look at this stuff for a long time. Now we're really trying to make sure that the evidence that comes off a crime scene is looked at immediately. And when you're talking about terrorism, is what we're talking about here today. Whether something is domestic terrorism, whether something is international terrorism, or whether it's a straight up crime, that evidence, that writings of the person, all that stuff that you're going to get from the crime scene is invaluable. But it needs to be looked at by somebody who knows what domestic terrorism is, and it needs to be looked at by somebody who knows what international terrorism and criminal, so that you can actually put an ideology, if there is one, to the criminal violent actions that took place. Shooting, a bombing, somebody drives a car into a group of people. Why did they do it? It's that forensic evidence along with the interviews that is gonna tell you that. So it really is one big picture, and I think it's so important that we talk about that stuff.
So when you joined the Joint Terrorism Task Force, I mean, does that force specifically look at things that are happening domestically, internationally? How did that? I mean, you started certainly in your career with the FBI, you were focused on some domestic groups, let's say. But
Yep.
How did that transition for you, or was it just you're working on everything?
No, so it's kind of a little bit like that, but the Joint Terrorism Task Force in the field offices across the FBI, there are 56 field offices in the FBI, and each one of them will have a component of Joint Terrorism Task Force on it. And when that happens, that means that those people will be talking or working on cases that are internationally based ideologies that may happen here in the United States, and also responsible for acts of terrorism that take place against U.S. citizens or U.S. interests. So those international terrorism investigators can be working here in the United States, and they can also be working in foreign lands. There's also squads that work domestic extremism, which is born and raised here in the United States, domestic in the jurisdiction, that type of terrorism. What you're seeing with Boogaloo Boys and Proud Boys and all the extremist elements within the left, the violent actors from Black Lives Matter, extremists. These all fall under domestic. And so when we're working these things, I have a lot of experience, unfortunately, from overseas, and that is because as part of the evidence response team, there are 4 offices in the FBI that have responsibility for working cases that take place in different parts of the world. In the Washington field office, it's changed over the years back and forth, but right now they're responsible for the Middle East and Eastern Europe. So if something blows up or if some horrendous crime takes place that's terrorism related, or we're invited in by that host country that says, hey, can you come send your evidence people to assist us, or investigators, the FBI will send people to go do that. So I've got my career, I consider myself very lucky that I've been able to be involved in a lot of historical, pretty amazing cases, and be able to be part of that, which is why you join an organization like the FBI.
Right. So how big of a problem is, if you had to sort of pick like there's no number here, but if you looked at international terrorism versus domestic terrorism, which one is the bigger threat, and percentage-wise, where should the focus be from your perspective?
Well, I think that it really is one of these things where you have to have 2 balls in the air here, right? You have to be able to pay attention to both international and domestic terrorism. One of the problems after 9/11 is that the United States government as a whole, and I think across the globe or around the globe, governments turn towards international terrorism, right? And how important international terrorism was. I mean, the United States just got attacked on 9/11, 2001, and lost almost 3,000 U.S. citizens and others. And so international terrorism became extremely important, as it was prior to, but even more resources were put there. Domestic terrorism was not in that same game because of what happened. But if we look at the statistics across the board, if you go from after 9/11 for terrorist incidents that have taken place in the United States, domestic terrorism, attacks and deaths related to terrorist incidents, domestic terrorism far outweighs the number of people killed in the United States based off of international terrorism. And if you break that down further, white supremacist violent activity is the lead. And in 2019, there were 52 people killed in the United States based off of right-wing extremist ideology. So unfortunately, there were several incidents that were large-scale. Oh, there we go.
There it goes.
And Kyla, quiet. Dog listens to me perfectly. I'm going to close the door here for a second. So you're
Yeah, no problem at all. No problem at all.
There we go.
Well, all right. Well, I'll tell you what. I have a question as well. So, you're talking about like the number of events and that sort of thing. So has there been a rise in, for example, like militia and domestic terrorism groups over the past, like if you were to look at over, from 2000, 2010 versus 2010 to 2020 or to current or to the present, is there a significant increase in these types of groups?
So there has been an increase in the membership or people following. Like a lot of these groups, they don't have membership, right? There's not like a list. There are some groups that actually do have that stuff. But really the difference for a lot of these, the difference between international terrorism and domestic terrorism, like if you look at the State Department, they have an actual list of international terrorist organizations, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, go down the list, right? It's all the players that we all have heard of. On domestic terrorism in the United States, there is no list of groups. It is First Amendment protected. So in the United States, the First Amendment is Rule 1. You don't call it the First Amendment because it's kind of important. It's extremely important. So people have the right to have, beliefs and followings that we may not agree with, but they have the ability to do it. It's when they use violence to forward that mission that it becomes illegal and a violation of federal law or state and local law. Has there been an increase? The answer is yes. But I think you need to look at much further back than the past decade. If you go back to the 60s and 70s, you would see that left-wing extremists, Weather Underground, Black Panther Party, were doing bombings, shootings, all sorts of stuff that you consider terrorism was in following the civil rights and the Vietnam War. And then when you get into the 80s, there's a swing back against that, and you start to see a rise in right-wing extremism. You have a very poor economy in the United States in the 1980s. Remember the gas lines and gas prices, really hurting the working class people in the United States. So because of that, you start to see this anti-government sentiment, and then you'll start to see a rise in the right-wing elements within the United States and also around the globe. What happens in Eastern Europe and in Europe generally is the same thing that's happening here in the United States. When we get into the 90s, we start to see groups such as the Aryan Nations, the World Church of the Creator, the National Alliance. These are large groups that had followings in the thousands. And the reason they did was they had very charismatic leaders. They had leaders such as William Pierce from the National Alliance, Matt Hale from the World Church of the Creator, and Richard Butler from the Aryan Nations. These guys were able to talk, and they weren't stupid. They just had a different belief system, and they wanted to have followers. They made money off of it, and they really spewed the white supremacist ideologies. There were things that happened in the 1990s, early 1990s. Ruby Ridge in the United States, there was a shootout at Ruby Ridge, and some family members were killed of a person who was being arrested for selling illegal shotguns to the ATF, and U.S. Marshal was killed. There was a siege. And during that, the perception by the extreme right was that the government had overreached their authorities, and people were killed. And then you had Waco take place in Texas, and that was another perception by the extreme right that the government in the United States had overreached their authorities. So much like the 60s and 70s, now you have coming out of the 80s, a bad economy. The working class is having a really tough time. They start to see this overreach of the government in their perception, and they start to form. And that leads us to Timothy McVeigh in 1995, who is a former military person, disgruntled, He believes strongly that the government is coming for his weapons. The Second Amendment in the United States protects the rights of the citizens to own firearms. And the more liberal the administration, the more the belief that by the extreme right is that they're going to come for our guns. Not like make some laws and restrict things, but these people believe that the federal agents will be knocking on your door and getting your guns that the government is going to take from you. And they'll say that is what happened in Nazi Germany when they went into the homes and took people's guns. And we've seen it take place in other places. But that's the belief in the 1990s. McVeigh does his bombing, and a lot of people fell off from that. They're like, hey, I'm not all about killing 19 children in a daycare. I do agree with the fight against the government. Those people who took McVeigh as a martyr and as a role model, really, they were the extreme of the extreme. And there were enough of them to continue into the 2000s, where we saw those same groups that I mentioned earlier really becoming much larger. And after 9/11, they kind of quieted down for a little bit, but then we had marches in Washington, D.C., at the Israeli embassy, at the German embassy, at the U.S. Capitol. So these groups were still here. And it is legal for them to do that. It is when they break away from that First Amendment protected activity and actually use force or violence. And the definition of domestic terrorism is the use of force or violence to intimidate or coerce a civilian population or to influence the policy of a government. So if you do something where you use serious violence, not just, hey, you and I are at a protest and you hit me with your sign, that's not terrorism, okay? That's the local police will arrest you for hitting me with a sign. But if you drive your car into the opposition and kill people, that's domestic terrorism. It fits the bill of the definition of domestic terrorism. The problem that I have with the current status of domestic terrorism legislation in the United States is we have a great definition which fits many crimes that have taken place over the past many years, but there's no penalty attached to that legal definition. So no one, and I will preface that with, if you use a weapon of mass destruction, there are some carve-outs in that legislation that you're able to be charged with certain violations, and that's because of the Timothy McVeigh bombing. They change things around. Mm-hmm. If you use a gun, you use a car, there is not, under federal statute, in many of these cases, like the shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue, 11 parishioners or 11 people going to temple are literally gunned down. Our evidence team went there and assisted with the collection of evidence. I worked the first day in the morgue with the victims and the medical examiners. This was a horrendous act. It is a hate crime, and Bowers, the shooter, is charged with a hate crime, but he should also be charged with domestic terrorism because he did this because he believed that the Jewish influence was bringing hordes in his line, hordes of people across the southern border. So a Israeli Jewish group bringing through a caravan people across the border into the United States illegally. And that's why he attacked that synagogue. So it is domestic terrorism, but there is no way to charge him with domestic terrorism.
Yeah, you bring up some good points here. So, for example, when there's an individual, I think violence is the sort of the line in the sand. Let's say, somebody.
100%. That is the only line in the sand, Eugene.
But there must be some gray in this. So, for example, somebody's online. People get all. How people are on discussion forums and boards or whatever, right? And they're like, somebody goes, well, F you, you guys. I hope you guys all blow yourselves up or something like that. Where do you ever run into problems or difficulties there?
Ever. Every day, people who work in domestic terrorism on the Joint Terrorism Task Forces run into exactly what you just spoke about. And that is because the First Amendment is so important that we have to protect people's rights to free speech. I can disagree with you. I can go, I can come up with some crazy stuff. I can be a follower of QAnon. Okay, that's a crazy conspiracy. It's not illegal. It's when you use the violence. So in the example of the people sending out emails and stuff on social media, it's very touchy, right? I mean, it's very, that razor thin line of, is this a threat or is this not a threat? I post a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, cases and stories that I find of interest related to domestic terrorism. And I received a response from somebody who said the tree, and he butchered the quote, and so I'll kind of go along, paraphrase what he said, but the tree of liberty should be needs to be watered with the blood of patriots. And I think he said ever so often or something, which is not the Thomas Jefferson quote, but it is the same idea of the saying that was on the shirt of Timothy McVeigh. So these guys on the extreme right, and when I say extreme right, I'm not talking Fox News or extreme left CNN. These people are outside of that. They're in, but all of that has something to do with it, right? Leading to it. So this person writes that. Then he says that the election was stolen, and I believe the election was stolen, and that patriots should be allowed, and it will have to use any force necessary to save the country from the liberal idiots, is what he said. So if somebody looked at that, they'd say, wow, that's a threat. Well, you look at it and you're like, it's not good, right? I mean, tomorrow, if this guy does something, are you going to go back and say, oh, you got that text? Yeah. But if for the FBI to go look at that person based off of that, it ain't happening. Because free speech and your right to disagree with somebody it really takes precedent on these cases. So it's working domestic terrorism, and I was a criminal investigator in the police department. I've worked international and domestic terrorism cases. I honestly believe that domestic terrorism is probably one of the most difficult violations to work because of the importance of the First Amendment, and that the vast majority of people involved in domestic incident. I mean, you're going to have people now, because of social media and the ability to communicate around the globe in a second. You can pick up now, and you're in Canada, I'm in the United States. We're talking international here, right? So I mean, that's how easy it is now. Before, you had to travel somewhere, you had to send letters. Now it's so easy that the international connection is clear, right, for these ideologies. And I would say that in the first time in history, the United States is not just a collector of propaganda and in pushing out terrorist ideologies. The people in the United States are now promoters of that. So, and which is a change in things. And you also have to look at all of in the United States. We are so polarized right now to basic left and right that it's difficult to even have a conversation with somebody because you don't know where they sit. So people don't talk about politics, right? Or if they do, they better know who they're talking to. I've always said that if you want to get out of buying Christmas presents this year, or whatever you celebrate, go have everybody from your family over and talk politics. By the end of that thing, you'll buy half the number of presents because your family is going to be pissed off at you. It's really strange times.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. So obviously we're going to get to this eventually, we have to, but it's the January 6th, insurrection, if you want to call it, on the Capitol. But are there certain events or certain things which can trigger like this extremism? I mean, I realize people plan or whatever, but in looking back, certainly the political environment, COVID. I don't know if COVID has had.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And so when we look at the 90s, right, and the 80s and 90s, you had the economy was low. If you weren't already rich, it was difficult to get a job, or it was tough times. You had the perception of the overreach of the government. Fast forward to now, you have an economy that if you're not already in the market, you're having a tough time because people are out of work, places are closed, and then add the pandemic in there, which the pandemic is currently really the Ruby Ridge and Waco of the 2021. It is the perception of the overreach of the government. You have a large portion of people that believe that, hey, they just said mask mandates. They just said if you're a U.S. Government employee or you have a company of over 100 people, you are mandated to take this shot. And so that is in the world of the extreme, that is believed to be government overreach. So literally all of the indicators and issues that were in the 80s and 90s that led to the Timothy McVeigh bombing are here now. The difference is social media, the ability to communicate discreetly and off the grid, so to say, is far better than it was back in the 80s and 90s. I mean, just on your phone, you have more than anybody in the 80s and 90s had in an entire office building, right? So the scary part about it is, and I don't want to be one of these people, oh, the world's ending and all that stuff like that, but you have all of these issues that are playing into this, and then you actually have, for the first time ever, you have the perception, and I'm not going to go down the road to say that I try in my communications on domestic terrorism, I try very hard to stay apolitical, to stay out of the politics, right? Because then that's just me voicing my political opinion, and I'm not going to do that. But what is happening in the United States right now is, on both sides of the political aisle, there are people in powerful positions that are fueling the potential for violence. And we saw that on January 6th, and in the lead up to January 6th. There is, and I look at the evidence, right? You look at the forensics, you look at the evidence. There is no evidence that anybody has been shown in court, 60 cases that have been shut down about the election tampering and this type of stuff. It hasn't been shown, right? Mm-hmm. But it's still being put out there as a theory, a conspiracy theory. And if you take conspiracy theories such as QAnon, accelerationism, which is just do anything to move forward the fall of our civil society, which is what groups like the Boogaloo Boys want, groups like the Antifa want. So, these are anti-government groups that they are more alike than they are disalike, except for they hate each other, right? So right now is a very difficult time, and I would venture to say that, and there's a lot of reporting in open source on this, that our foreign adversaries have had a hand in the disinformation, misinformation, and tampering with the amount of information that's out there, so that people are drawn on both sides of the political coin to their corners. And divide and conquer is a serious way of crushing an adversary. And divide and conquer is what's happening to us here in the United States, and I would say Canada also. We are simpatico with our Canadian brethren and sisters. It is something that if it's happening here, it's happening there. Yeah. And it's sad, but it really is. The potential for the lone offender is great, and to see the group that attacked the Capitol on January 6th in that many. I mean, we're over 550 people charged in federal court with different levels of criminal activity, and that's a lot of people to assault the center of our government. And then you have people that work in that building that are legislators that are saying, hey, nothing happened, didn't happen. And all you need to do is take one of those attacks on police officers. Just take one of them. Take that film, which we've all seen, so we know it happened. Take that film, put it on Interstate 95 with a trooper that just pulled somebody over, and the person gets out with a big stick and starts beating that officer. People would be out of their minds. But because this took place at the Capitol, there's a segment of our population that's saying it didn't happen. And Saturday we're having another rally in Washington D.C. Of people who are supporting the quote unquote political prisoners from the January 6th. The people that are, I mean, if you're looking for issues to throw somebody over that edge, it's
yeah.
And as we polarize in the United States, and I would say around the globe, it's happening in many countries where the people are going to their political corners, right? And as you do that, you have more people on the extreme. And if you have more people on the extreme, you're going to have the potential for more people to be violent extremists. And I think we saw that on January 6th. Not all those people were went there with the idea of attacking the Capitol. But
right.
Some did.
Yeah, I mean, there were some notable people there. There were politicians. There were people from New Mexico. There was Olympians. I mean, it's just weird. It was just a massive mix.
If you look down the list of people charged, it really is disgusting. And one of the groups that was in large number there, and when I say large number, it's not. I mean, it's not like hundreds, but the Oath Keepers, which for me as a law enforcement officer for 35 years. I took an oath. I took an oath as a local law enforcement. I took an oath as a federal agent to protect the citizens of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. The Oath Keepers believe that they're following their oath. But sadly, they believe that the current government, is the enemy. And so to see people who are former law enforcement, former military, active law enforcement, even in small numbers, it's disheartening and very dangerous. Now you have to say that if you look at the military and retired military, the number of people involved in that movement it wouldn't even be a percentage point, right? It's that small. Same with the law enforcement. It's that small. The 99.999% of people who are in the military and law enforcement are doing it for the right reasons. They actually took an oath that they're upholding. But that very small percentage of people that were at the Capitol were able to lead others because they have a very small, or they have a tactical mindset. And you can see that happen on the Capitol just by watching the video. The people dressed in the military gear and helmets in 3 different columns going up in 3 different locations to separate the law enforcement. And so, it's very dangerous. It is a very dangerous time, unfortunately.
Well, I wanted to ask about some of the groups because you mentioned a number there, but in sort of the background work that I was doing here for this talk, one thing that sort of was a common theme or kept coming up was the white supremacist groups and them being a very big threat, maybe the largest one domestically. And so I was just wondering if you could give some insight on that and why that might be.
Well, it is. If you look at the statistics and the white nationalist, white supremacist movements and ideologies is currently the largest threat to acts of domestic terrorism or any act of terrorism in the United States. Now, there are with the closing of the war in Afghanistan and how that happened, which nobody's going to sit here and tell you that went smoothly, right? That was bad, and that is going to increase the potential recruitment in the international terrorism side of things, but it is also going to potentially increase the recruitment on the domestic side, because you have a lot of people who went to Afghanistan to do the right thing for the U.S. military intelligence, and they're really not happy with what happened. So out of that, a very small percentage of people, even after the Vietnam War, you saw the disgruntled people that had served became an issue on small levels. I think you're going to see the same thing, and it really just is another layer of the government. And if this anti-government ideologies are really dangerous at this point. It's fine the best part about the United States and Canada is you can disagree with your government. You can go stand out in front of the U.S. Capitol with a sign and say, I hate everybody, and I think you guys are doing a bad job. That's what we're supposed to do. Right? I have a slide in one of my presentations that shows a Black Lives Matter protest and a Stop the Steal protest. And the line I have above that is, this is not a terrorist. Neither of these groups are terrorists, right? They're just voicing their opinions. They're voicing their rights under the First Amendment to free speech, to peaceably assemble. Peaceable assembly does not mean quiet assembly, right? So you can go there and make all the noise you want, beat drums and yell and scream. It's when you use force or violence to get your ideals and your ideologies move forward, to either influence the policy of a government or intimidate or coerce a civilian population. That is when you have met the definition of domestic terrorism. And again, there's only one case that I know of, and because it was my case, where a shooter entered a conservative think tank and shot a security officer at that thing. And his intention was to, quote, in his words, kill as many people as possible and smear Chick-fil-A sandwiches in their face, right? This was as a form of protest. He was a left-wing extremist. He was a protester that went to the extreme and used force or violence. And before he used that force or violence, there was nothing illegal he was doing. He was voicing his opinion. And that person was charged under a DC, which is a federal city, charged with a federal crime. So he's the only person that I know of that, outside of the use of a weapon of mass destruction, has been charged with terrorism for an act of domestic terrorism, using a gun.
Interesting. So I want to ask you about the Attorney General, Merrick Garland. So in June of 2021, he laid out some new policies and that sort of thing. And my question would be, what is the law? Like, what is lacking in the law right now? Are there gaps? Are there loopholes? What are some of the problems that you're facing right now with respect to the law?
So it's the same thing, Eugene. It is that we have a definition that I consider very good definition of domestic terrorism. There's no teeth to that law. So what people say, well, the person's going to go to jail anyway because you're going to charge them with firearms violations, assaults, homicides. They're going to go to jail, and I agree 100%. Person's going to go to jail, but they're not designated as a domestic terrorist, right? If a person does a violent action and their ideology is based off of ISIS or one of the other designated groups, if they do that in the United States, even if they're a U.S. citizen, they're charged with material support to terrorism or terrorism. If that person commits a crime, you can go to Google and run a search on how many people have been charged with international terrorism charges in the United States, and you'll get a list, a pretty cohesive list of people charged because they've been charged. Mm-hmm. Or documentation of it. If you run that same list for domestic acts of domestic terrorism, you'll find anecdotal comments by reporters or even U.S. attorneys and the Attorney General, people saying, "Oh, that is an act of domestic terrorism." Okay, charge them with it. And so if you can't recognize what the problem is, then you can't put the resources that are necessary and the actual effort to what it is. We know after 9/11, here's your issue, right? So as a government, we put a lot of resources towards that. Mm-hmm. If we look at the statistics and take cases that meet the definition of domestic terrorism has killed more people in the United States since 9/11 than international terrorism. You could say that's because we're doing a great job on international terrorism investigations, but it would also tell you that we're not doing as good a job on domestic terrorism, and that may be because we didn't recognize what that threat was. And being a person that worked domestic terrorism for 23 years, I am, I'm not proud to say, but it was a second-tier violation in the U.S. government across the board. Not just the FBI, but across the board in the U.S. government, domestic terrorism was not your top tier. And anybody who tells you that it was is either lying to you or never worked it.
I see.
Because that's the truth. We need to have a penalty so we can address the issue itself. And so that I think is honestly the biggest problem that I see. We have great investigators out there that want to work domestic terrorism, and they are working these cases. And that's why you see people getting arrested for all sorts of things, domestic terrorism wise, but they're not. It's not being billed as domestic terrorism, so nobody knows about it, right?
Okay, so they're not actually getting charged for domestic terrorism.
Honestly, the only person that I know of that is charged for a shooting, I mean, even when in Charlottesville, when the car was driven into the protests and Heather Heyer was killed, I mean, clearly, how much more of an act of domestic terrorism can you have, right? So the definition, using serious force or violence to intimidate or coerce a civilian population. You just drove your car into a group of people who oppose your political views, or to influence the government, right? So I think you got both of those there, and you got the violence. So
is that the one in Charlottesville?
Yes, and that is an act of domestic terrorism. That person was never charged. He's charged with homicide, charged with assault. He's going to jail forever. But it's not listed as people will call him a domestic terrorist, but he's not listed as a domestic. He was charged with hate crimes, which, if you look at it, hate crimes, extremely important that we address hate crimes, that we put down. We have our own statute for crimes against people, for their sexual preferences, for their religious beliefs, for a myriad of things, that if you attack somebody, if you use force or violence against this person because of those individual things or a mix of them, that's a hate crime. And that's a serious, serious crime. Okay, so we can charge people with assaults. We can charge them, and we can say, well, the reason he did it was the person was a homosexual, so they shot him. Yeah, it's that important that we created a crime in and of itself as a hate crime. It's just as important for domestic terrorism that we say domestic terrorism is an issue that we need to address. There needs to be a penalty for violating that definition that's already on the books under U.S. Code 182331. It's right there. It's easy to read. But there's no way to charge somebody with it.
So is anybody working on implementing some kind of mechanism to do that?
So we have, when I used to be the president of the FBI Agents Association, which is an association that represents all 14,000 members. Most FBI agents are members of this. And one of the things that when I was president, we started pushing was getting a penalty assigned to the definition of domestic terrorism. And I started that after the 2012 shooting at the Chick-fil-A, at the Family Research Council. And so that tells you how many years I have been advocating for this, right? And people ask, well, why wouldn't Congress just kind of go, that's a no-brainer? Well, because the fear is from both the left and the right in the Congress is that the law will be used, the penalty will be used against the opponent, your opposite political party. And so to make sure that doesn't happen, you have my belief is you have to have a serious criminal violence, right? Something that holds a 5-year federal penalty in jail, right? So a serious event. I honestly think that the number of people that I would have charged with an act of domestic terrorism is small. It's small because they didn't meet that. It doesn't happen a lot where people meet that rigorous standard. So if you made it that strict, and there are guidelines in the U.S. government, the Attorney General guidelines, which tell FBI agents what you can and cannot investigate, when you can investigate. And the FBI has gone a step further to put more restrictions on agents to make sure that there is check and balance. It's called the Domestic Intelligence Operation Guide. And it is, you can't just go out and start, hey, I'm going to investigate Eugene for domestic terrorism. That doesn't work like that, right? You have to, write up all sorts of paperwork to get it approved by your supervisor, by your boss's boss, all the way up into the Department of Justice headquarters. So it's not like people are running around willy-nilly, going after people for terrorism, especially domestic terrorism, because of that First Amendment. If we added that penalty, I think it would make a big difference. I do not think that the FBI needs more authority for surveillance, like the ability to listen to people more. It's already there, right? If you have a good case, you can get these authorities, right? But you have to have a case. You have to have evidence of that something is going on. And I also don't believe that we don't need more authorities across the board to give the FBI and law enforcement the ability to reach out further. We have it. All they need is put that in there, and they're not doing it because right now it's a difficult time because you have this polarization, right? And so the left doesn't want to do it because they feel like the right will be, we're no better further down the road than we were after 2012 when I started this effort, But
do you feel that the FBI is sort of holding the short end of the stick because they're reactionary, or I mean, do they have enough to get things going? And I guess the next thing for me there would be, we don't often hear about the plots that have been foiled. We hear about when something happens, right? So, is there a lot of good news in the background that the FBI is doing good work and we just don't hear about it?
Yeah, there is. And so those cases are still being worked, right? And that's what we did for all the years I was in there. I mean, there were people that went to jail for gun charges. People went to jail for all sorts of different things that agents were working the cases under the domestic terrorism apparatus, the anti-government, anti-authority, white nationalists, racially motivated violent extremists. That's still being done. The cases are being worked. People can rest assured that people are out there doing their job. I think we just need to be able to, would it make a difference to you if the FBI arrested somebody for a possession of an automatic weapon, right? Illegally possessing an automatic weapon. That doesn't make, nobody knows about that, right? But I can give you a couple of cases where we arrested Aryan Nations members with machine guns, and they got 12 months because they were just arrested because it's not illegal to be a member of the Aryan Nations. Right. If that person was able to be charged with something, domestic terrorism, then you have something that it actually has some teeth in it.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. We're getting on in time, so I want to be mindful here. But I do have one important question for you, and that is that you've obviously done this for a while. You had a great career with them, and you're continuing to do this work. So, what have you learned over the sort of the course of your time at the FBI and working in this area that would be, or that you could tell people as some of the most important takeaways?
Well, I think right now, the environment that we're working in or that we're living in is, again, polarized. If you have somebody that is in your circle of friends or somewhere that you have contact with, and you're seeing this person kind of really go down that rabbit hole, whether it be conspiracy theories or not just the political discord back and forth, but this person is talking about stuff that really if it makes you think there's something wrong here, then you really should. The only way that the FBI and law enforcement in general is going to get in front of any of these incidents that have been taking place and that could take place down the road is that somebody says, hey, I'm going to call somebody and I'm going to let them know about this person. And maybe before something happens, they get this person some help, right? So that they don't end up going to jail for the rest of their life. And doing something that they may not really have been bent on. So I think it's important that the old adage that from 9/11, the see something, say something, that people really need to look out for their friends and family and try and get in front of that before. And because right now, there are people out there that are just getting ginned up and the gasoline is being poured on the fire. And the only way to prevent things is to get people to actually communicate, and talk to somebody. That's why community policing is so important. Find a law enforcement officer you trust, call somebody you trust, and that's why law enforcement needs to be in the community so they can build that trust. And I think they're doing a good job of that across the board. But we can always do better, and people need to be part of this, right? And get involved, because you can't just sit back and wait for law enforcement to uncover every plot. The most important part of working these cases is human intelligence, right? That somebody calls and says, hey, I'm concerned about this person, and then let law enforcement do the job. They're not going to go out there and kick down this guy's door just based off of you saying, hey, I think this person's having some issues and they're talking about violence. But you may be able to get in front of it. We just saw recently at a school in the United States where some young individuals were plotting a shooting, and somebody said something. Another student, hey, they got a gun in the bag, and they prevented it. That's the way it works. So.
Yeah, it's a great point actually, because in a lot of the cases that I was looking at, I mean, the scary ones are the ones where you can't expect it because the people don't have any sort of history. But in many cases, there are people that are homeless, they have mental issues, there's drug issues, there's previous convictions or previous problems with the law and that sort of thing. So I think those types of cases can definitely be identified or whatever if people speak up. It's
just doing the right thing to try and take care of people, and those people who potentially could become perpetrators, you're taking care of them also by not getting them into further down this road. You're trying to intervene before something bad happens. I think it's important. Hey, before you cancel this event here today, I just wanted to say, I know we had talked about the Blackwater shooting.
Yeah.
And today is the 14th anniversary of the shooting at Nisour Square, and on this date, I always think about a 9-year-old boy named Ali, who was gunned down in that event along with 13 others, and was killed in the backseat of his father's car. I just want to say that we think about the victims. And it doesn't have to be U.S. citizens. These people were Iraqis, and the FBI did their job. The Department of Justice did their job. The defense attorneys did their job. The jury did their job, and the perpetrators that we brought to justice were found guilty. I just wanted to put out that to think of the families of Nisour Square.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that case as well because I worked on that a little bit as well. But yeah, it was an extremely tragic case and an enormous loss of innocent lives, really. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I didn't realize it was the anniversary date. So yeah, thanks a lot. Well, I'll tell you what, and if in the future, if that's going to be a topic of discussion, I would definitely do something like that in the future.
I would be more than happy to come back and talk about.
Okay, yeah, it's a very interesting case of what happened. I don't think enough people know about it, to be quite honest with you.
Yep. If you go to my LinkedIn page, I posted something about it today at Tom O'Connor at LinkedIn.
And on that note, that's a great reminder for me, because I am going to add, for those of you that want to reach out to Tom, he can be found on LinkedIn. So just Tom O'Connor here on LinkedIn. His page looks something like this, and he's really active, has some great information here, some great posts. So go ahead and if you want to link up with him or send him a message, he's just on LinkedIn. Tom, listen, thank you so much. Like I said, it's great. I love it when there's really passionate people, very knowledgeable people, and you're definitely one of those. Thank you so much for being here. And yeah, I'm definitely going to have you back here again if you're willing.
Awesome. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
All right. Hey, hang back here. I'll come back and chat with you.
Okay, very good. Take care, guys.
All right. Cheers. Bye. All right, folks. So that does it. That's episode 40. A great discussion, something that I haven't covered before. So it was great to get that sort of insight. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to end here. Next week, I'm going to have his name is Francois Xavier Laurent, and he's from Interpol. And we are going to be talking about iFamilia. It's a new familial DNA system that they have that's going to help fight crime, but also, and even more importantly, to help connect people from around the world, families that are refugees and that sort of thing. So next week, Thursday, 2 p.m., we'll see you there. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.